Bonjour everyone, I am Anne-Lise Cailliez and welcome to Parlez-vous CEO, where we ditch the corporate talk and get real about entrepreneurship. Each week, I chat with founders and CEOs who build businesses their way, through the failures, pivots, and breakthroughs. And they bring the fire. Plus, I'll drop some golden nuggets of wisdom from my own entrepreneurial journey. This is your space to grow, learn, and evolve with a true growth mindset. Remember, success isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Now let's kick things off and get this party started. Hello, bonjour, bonjour, hello. Welcome to another episode of Parlez-vous CEO. My name is Anne-Lise Cailliez and I am your host. For those who are just joining the podcast, we're Brandora and we specialize in helping real estate companies scale their revenue. If you want to learn how to take your business to the next level, make sure to stick around. And if you're interested in a free growth consultation, just drop the word growth in the DMs. So we have a very exciting guest today and I'm super pumped to have with us Audrey Navarro. Audrey, in your own words, could you tell a little bit about your story and your backgrounds to our audience?
Sure. I started my commercial real estate career a little over 20 years ago, very unintentionally. So my background was in elementary education. I started my career teaching elementary school very briefly. It definitely was not for me.
Okay.
I ended up working for a finance company. And in 2003, the finance company I worked for primarily financed energy projects. And it closed its operations in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a wonderful mentor, my father, who had convinced me to, instead of a home, to buy a duplex as my first home. And I had a little tiny bit of real estate experience living in one side and renting out the other side of that duplex. And so I convinced him, along with my brother, to start a real estate investment company.
Oh, wow.
And in 2003, we bought our first apartment building.
Uh-huh.
I also took a full-time position with the Cushman office here in Kansas City to learn more about commercial real estate because I really had no experience. And I ended up running their retail division, which was mostly national landlords and national tenants. And all of my work was in the suburbs by day. And all of my personal investments with my family were in the core of the city, really in the urban core of Kansas City. And so we were renovating historic apartment buildings that were 100 plus years old and really doing, I'm going to say, some creative redevelopment of those older buildings. And that's been our bread and butter business over the past 25 years. We also now do quite a bit of industrial, office, and retail. We've dabbled in a little bit of hospitality.
Wow, that's such an awesome story from education to commercial real estate and with your family, having your brother and your father buy your first building with you. How did you convince them to be on board and start this thing with you?
So I think my brother had the same itch that I did. He really had been lobbying for the same thing. We convinced our dad to give us a loan to buy a small apartment building, actually two small apartment buildings that were next door to each other. And we started our journey really kind of blind. We didn't know a lot about apartments. We both lived in apartments, so we knew that you put a sign out. At the time, there was no internet or very limited use of internet. You put a sign out when it's vacant and you fix things when they're broken. And that was kind of the nuts and bolts of our strategy to begin with. And we started looking in different urban neighborhoods of Kansas City, partly because that's what we could afford, and partly because we really wanted to take on some kind of renovation or large repair project. And again, that's what we could afford. The first building that we bought, the day we closed, the sewer backed up in the basement. So we learned by trial and error a lot of lessons about 100-year-old buildings. And these were really in neighborhoods that were, I'm going to say primarily slumlords were operating these properties historically. And we felt like the problem wasn't supply and demand really. It was there was no quality properties in some of these neighborhoods, even though there was demand for nicer apartments. So we really took a little bit higher level of finish approach. And I know that our neighboring property owners thought we were just dumb kids at the time. Why are they spending so much
Well,
money
it's so fancy,
renovating
yeah.
these crummy apartments? But really, that's the part of the business that we love.
I love that. And so to this day, are you still working with your brother and your father?
Yeah. So my dad has been our primary investor in lots of properties over the years. About 10 years ago, I left the Cushman office and we expanded our family company into a full service commercial real estate firm. My brother is still my business partner, and we both have different skill sets. And so it's been a really great partnership. He loves to do the things that I don't love to do,
Perfect.
and vice versa. And
Match made in heaven.
Yes, yes. And I run our brokerage division, which is really the agency side of what we do. We've got 12 commercial agents in our office that all specialize in different asset classes. And we still own those first two buildings that we bought. So every year we acquire a couple of properties, and we are long-term real estate investors and owners. So typically we buy and hold.
And so you said your brother was complementary. You're on the brokerage side. What does your brother do?
The operations side.
So sales and his back office.
Yeah, so I run our sales team, and we're really, I'm going to say, business development and collaboration focused. We work with a lot of clients solving problems or creating opportunities. And then my brother works on the side of the business of not only overseeing our own properties, but he's really the asset management piece of the equation. He oversees the property management, the construction, and then he also really drives acquisitions and dispositions.
I see. What's your favorite part of the business?
My favorite part of the business is the creative problem solving. I feel like so oftentimes we think that we sell or develop real estate and it's all about the building. And I would tell you that we really sell our time and information. It's all about the relationships that you build and the information that goes into those acquisitions and dispositions and strategies. So we really help with the creative problem solving piece of the puzzle.
And you mentioned you have 12 agents. Was it hard to build a team of team members that you actually wanted to work with, or was it not a challenge for you?
You know, I came from the brokerage side of the business, so I had worked in a similar environment for a larger national company. And I would tell you it's probably the easiest part of the business for me. I really enjoy connecting with people and helping them identify opportunities. And in our industry, I feel like one of the biggest hurdles is going from the brokerage or the real estate agent side of the equation to the ownership side of the equation. So a lot of our agents found us because they wanted to learn how to own real estate, not just how to broker
Interesting.
real estate.
Interesting. They wanted to have the investor side of things.
And we really focus on the mentorship piece of it. I feel like we call it working for tips. We work for commissions, so we help our clients solve problems and acquire and dispose of properties that they own. We help them with the leasing strategy, but we also really have a desire to grow our own investment portfolio alongside our clients. Oftentimes we end up being either equity partners with clients or we end up being operating partners and the clients are our equity partners. So it really depends on the project and really what expertise the parties bring to the table.
Interesting. Does it ever come up as a challenge that you're both a broker and an investor on certain deals? Do you have ever either a buyer telling you, why don't you buy it yourself?
We have that question a lot. You know, I would tell you that we are primarily on our own portfolio, we are the high risk takers. We're usually finding a creative solution to a property that nobody else wants.
Interesting.
Sometimes those projects are a much heavier lift. So the 100-year-old building that's been vacant for 10 years that, has no building systems that are functional, and the seller is trying to figure out what to do with it. Or maybe the city or the neighborhood association comes to us and says, hey, we need help. And by the way, not all of those scenarios can we be the solution to, but oftentimes we find a creative strategy in there where we can solve a problem. And it's usually a problem that nobody else really wants to take on. And so again, oftentimes we're the solution to someone who wants to sell, or the opposite happens. Somebody comes to us and says, hey, I found this great property. I can only lease it and I need someone to help me buy it because the property owner only wants to sell it. We've done that for some industrial clients over the years who have not been in a position to purchase, but they really have a great track record to lease, and we help them from that perspective. I would just say that we also have a very small appetite. So we just have a little family investment company. I'm not a big fan of taking on hundreds of stranger partners. So we really work with friends and family in that category, and or tenant occupants who want a path to ownership.
That's very interesting. So I have two questions. So I'm very interested in hearing why you actually decide to work with friends and family. And the second is, why do you decide to take on those super difficult deals that no one want to take?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. I think the more complex the property is, the more creative we can be in solving for the equation. I feel like the expertise that we bring to the table is a little bit unique, and we have an appetite for a little bit more risk, especially now that we have a lot of experience under our belt. We can afford to take a little bit more risk. I feel like there's a lot of passive investors out there, or what I'd say out of market investors. And it's really hard to take risk on a property where you can't just drive down the street and solve a problem.
Right.
So I feel like we really bring the operational expertise to that equation. And we don't say yes to everything.
Only if it's very, very hard.
Part of this business is learning when to say no. And we have been fortunate enough that we have incrementally grown. So we started out with very small properties. We learned a lot of hard lessons. But it was at a time when returns were a lot healthier, and the size of those properties was small enough that we had lots of room to experiment. And so I feel like we've taken that expertise and translated it into projects that make sense.
So you do take the difficult deals, but you have the confidence and you're gonna execute very well.
Yeah. Only where we bring the solution. I do also think that we're looking for higher returns, and the only way to accomplish higher returns is to take higher risk, but it's a calculated risk.
Right. And speaking of risk, to go back to my question, working with friends and family, what is your take on that?
I feel like this era of commercial real estate has inspired a lot of syndication, and the access to investing in real estate has really come down to the individual level as opposed to the institutional level. But I am a really big fan of this being a relationship-based business. And I don't want 100 partners that I don't know, that I don't know well, and that I don't trust, and that I don't have a deep enough a relationship to trust. We're in a business of making predictions, and predictions do not always go the way that you expect. And so having the flexibility to pivot and being able to take opportunities when they present themselves. I'd give the example, we typically don't do any single family, but we own some apartments on a stretch of a block that had some really derelict vacant buildings that the owner died and her kids were cleaning up. And we have had our eye on cleaning up those properties for a long time. We definitely didn't want them to sit for another decade vacant. And so we bought them, we renovated them with the intent to sell them to single-family homeowners. But after renovating and selling 2 of them, we decided to keep the other 2 as Airbnbs because that was a business model that was taking off at the time. And this was about 7 or 8 years ago. And we wouldn't have had that flexibility if we had partners that had a fixed business plan. We were lucky enough to have partners that could pivot with us.
I see. And for sure, then I can see how it's absolutely beneficial. And so in your line of business, you have 2 type of clients, right? Because you're both an investor and a broker. For each side of the business, what are your client acquisition mechanism on the broker side and on the investor side?
So our client acquisition strategy on the brokerage side of the business is really relationship based. So I think we really work with a lot of vendors that service our industry, and we spend a lot of time building those relationships and cross-pollinating. So the categories that come to mind that are the best referral partners on the brokerage side are insurance companies, property insurance agents. Every single closing that we have needs a certificate of insurance the day it closes. So we are really big referral partners with our insurance folks in the market. The same thing with lenders. Every property, I shouldn't say every, but the majority of the properties that we are involved in transactions with need a loan the day of closing. And so we find that commercial property owners have relationships with lenders and insurance brokers. And so that's a very tight-knit community. The same thing is true of architects and contractors. So we spend quite a bit of time in that space. We're very involved with industry organizations like the ULI chapter in Kansas City, the Urban Land Institute. And then secondly, I feel like we spend a lot of time with, I'm going to say, very niche organization. Our retail leasing team is very involved in the Restaurant Association, and they work with a lot of restaurant owners. We have a couple of folks that are very involved with nonprofits in the community, and they do a lot of nonprofit consulting on their commercial real estate and facilities needs. We do a lot of speaking engagements to educate special populations, whether it's on the investor side, whether it's on the operator or retailer or tenant side. Our industry is relationship driven from that perspective. And then the other part of the equation as a broker is all of the listing platforms that are out there. So we're doing a lot of advertising of properties that are vacant. We're doing a lot of networking within the neighborhoods and the communities that we're working in, whether it's chambers of commerce or business associations to fill those vacancies.
Typically, what would you say, for how long would you say those vacant properties stay on the market for the properties that you're working on in general?
That's a good question. So it depends on the asset class. And it also depends on the location. And the longest on the market is land. So land is an average today of 5 years on the market.
5 years.
It's a long transaction cycle, but we have a surplus of land in Kansas City. So we are an MSA of about 2 million. And there's been a lot of suburban sprawl over the past 50 years. And so there's still a lot of undeveloped green space in those suburban markets. And, supply and demand of a market size of 2 million can only provide for a certain amount of retail or multifamily or industrial development. And there's more land than there is in terms of that supply. The way that we kind of creatively problem solve in that space is we're usually helping to educate the landowners how to really put their property at the front of the line, so to speak. And oftentimes it's not about price or location. It's about equity required.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes we're partnering a landowner to either seller finance or contribute the land as equity to a project,
Mm-hmm.
because that allows the developer to bring zero
Mm-hmm.
or maybe a lot lower amount of equity to the development on the
Mm-hmm.
front end and share in those returns with the landowner.
Interesting. And do you typically work mainly on exclusive listings or open listings?
Yeah, primarily on exclusive listings.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think in the brokerage industry in general, it's so hard since we sell our time,
Mm-hmm.
it's so hard to give that time away for free
Mm-hmm.
without any promise or commitment on the other end.
Absolutely.
And so we really have a pretty firm policy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, unless we are working in a space that we're solving a creative.
Mm-hmm.
So occasionally we will do consulting for a client,
Mm-hmm.
and it might not even lead to a transaction, but we're charging some kind of consulting fee to develop the strategy.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on working. I'm a marketer, so maybe that's also why, but I'm completely with you with having exclusive because otherwise it's really hard to have your team focus on open listings. So I'm with you. And so speaking of marketing, what are some of the worst and best marketing activities or campaigns that you've done? And do you have any funny stories around it?
But that's a great question. I think from a marketing perspective, some of the best things that we have done have been targeted campaigns to a very specific audience.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I would share, we love storytelling
Mm-hmm.
and the case studies that go around. For example, our nonprofit specialty group, they really tell great stories about creative problem solving. And I feel like that's really what wins assignments,
Mm-hmm.
because oftentimes our clients in that category, they don't know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping them take that journey and really mentoring them along the way of what all the choices are in their decision making.
Mm-hmm.
I think oftentimes nonprofits start with the idea, we need to build a new building.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about the existing inventory out there? New construction is about 400% of the cost of existing inventory on average in our market.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the asset class, it could be 8 or 10 times more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping them think through the economics of their decisions as opposed to just jumping to the only conclusion they might be familiar with.
Why a nonprofit more keen to do new construction instead of buying an existing building?
I
What's the
feel like,
rationale?
yeah, I feel like part of it is they don't do real estate every day. So they see other nonprofits building new buildings or building new
Mm,
campuses. So that's one reason. I think the second reason is because typically nonprofits, especially in our market and finance wise, I would imagine this is a national phenomenon. They really have to go through a process of raising a capital campaign and they have to own the building. And so they're typically not set up in a way where they can fund rent every year. So
mhm,
that's a fundraising exercise that happens every year versus purchasing a building and raising the money all up front so that they don't have to raise money every year for acquisition cost.
mhm,
And that's a long process.
mhm,
And typically it's really hard to raise money to buy a building when you don't know what the building is. So
mhm.
really painting that vision,
Right.
it's easy to do with land.
Mhm,
But again, it costs a lot more than purchasing a building.
that makes, yeah.
And so coming up with some creative strategies to bridge the financing or the economic gap from start of a campaign to the end of a campaign is one of the areas that we help them strategize about.
And you work with a lot of nonprofits.
We work with a lot of nonprofits. Yeah.
Why do they go through you specifically?
I think it's just really a gap in the marketplace. There's not a lot of advisors in our industry who help nonprofits from the beginning of the decision making
Mm,
path to really identify what the choices are. So, usually by the time they engage a broker, somebody in their organization has already decided, hey, we're going to buy a piece of land or we're going to buy a
mm,
building or we're going to build a building. And so they've already made the decision, but they didn't have any advice along the way.
mm.
And most of these organizations are decision-making by committee.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have a banker and a lawyer and a teacher or an artist. I mean, you could have any variety of board members
Mm-hmm.
that are contributing to that decision-making, but oftentimes nobody has any commercial real estate experience.
Mm. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. So the importance of finding the right partner to hold your hand during that difficult process for sure.
Yeah.
And if you had, I like to ask that question, if you had a magic wand to solve one of the most pressing pain points of your business, of Clemens, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that it would probably be growing our team with experienced either agents, commercial agents, or experienced business professionals who are making a career change into that role.
Mm.
We have such a long sales cycle
Mm-hmm.
in a commission-only industry that attracting the right talent who has the stomach for a commission-only career
Mm-hmm. Right.
and is not fresh out of college with no business
Mm-hmm.
experience, which is really hard. It is such a hard industry to start
It is.
fresh out of college just because you just don't know what you don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's one of our biggest challenges to growth is
Including.
identifying professionals who are the right fit and have the right aptitude for a commission-only environment.
Do you find that as you are looking for new members, are you seeing more and more women applying for commercial roles?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So when I started in commercial real estate, I want to say I could count on maybe one hand how many women were in the industry at all, other than as administrative support to brokers.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the firm that I worked for at the time, and this was in the early 2000s, I think there were 3 or 4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we were one of the largest companies in town.
Mm-hmm.
And I was grateful to have wonderful mentors in that firm. And I don't feel like gender was ever an issue in the workplace, other than women weren't present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I worked really hard to try to fit in with the men. And, I feel like over the years, especially in the past 5 to 7 years in the Kansas City market, we've seen a huge shift.
Mm.
In fact, I co-founded an organization called Wired Women in Real Estate Development
Nice.
with a longtime colleague and friend, Cheryl Vickers. And it really started as the two of us were complaining over cocktails like, hey, it was so hard when we started and there were no mentors and it was just like we didn't know any other women and it was just so hard. And I don't know what everybody was doing on the golf course, but we weren't included in that. And so, we decided, well, why don't we get all of our, senior women in the industry together and start inviting the junior women to those conversations and really become the mentors we wished we had.
Love
And get
that.
more attention. And we now have a group of over 100 women in Kansas City. And by the way, I didn't even know there were 100 women who were investing and or developing real estate in Kansas City at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, they came from all different types of industries.
Mm-hmm.
We have women in our group who are solopreneurs who, I just met someone last week who is building townhomes.
Mm-hmm.
She's been building townhomes on her own by herself for about 10 years. She doesn't have any, I'm going to say, industry tribe. She's a solopreneur and she's really doing amazing things. And so we've connected with all kinds of women across the city who are doing really wonderful work, who might not be with big companies, but are really making an impact.
I love hearing that. Can you share with the audience the name of the group again?
Yes, it's called Wired.
Wired.
Women in Real Estate Development.
Nice.
And we have a website. It's wiredkc.org.
Oh, lovely. I love that you created that group. And I heard you earlier saying that you were trying to fit in working with, men. How did you try to fit in?
Well,
What were you doing?
I had 2 small kids at the time. So, I was at the office and I was I'm going to say really independent. Like, I was grateful at the time that my kid's dad stayed home a lot. He took care of all of the doctor's appointments and this I'm sick at school pickups and all of those types of things. Because again, I'm working in an industry that, all of the men have somebody else who can do that. And if I'm not present and available, I really felt like I was missing out on opportunities. And so the other thing was my mom told me, "Why are you dressing like a grandma?" This was in my 20s. And I'm like, well, I got to fit in. And all of the guys are wearing business suits. And like, I'm trying not to be someone's secretary. That's what I'm trying to do. So, I'm trying to make a distinction here with my wardrobe, which clearly is not working.
It's your mom who said that?
Yes, it
Oh
was
my
my mom
God.
who said that.
I mean, coming from a parent, that's even more, knife in the heart.
Yeah.
So did you change your outfits afterwards?
No, it took me a while. It took me a while. And really, it took me a while to not really, or to feel comfortable enough being independent with, any kind of style or, I'm going to say workplace environment type stuff. When everybody around you is wearing a 3-piece suit, like that's what I did. I just really wanted to, really wanted to
That's what
fit
I
in.
did too.
Yeah, in hindsight, I feel like it was probably overkill, but I do think that times have changed. So the things I notice now, a lot of the men are taking paternity leave in our office, right? They're spending time at home with their families and their kids, and they're working from home. And I feel like it's that piece of the puzzle has really changed. And I'm really grateful that those formalities have softened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And specifically in an industry like real estate where it's 24/7, do you navigate? It's not exactly a work-life balance. I don't fully believe in work-life balance, especially when you're your own business owner, but how do you maintain a work-life harmony?
I am lucky in this season of my life. My kids are grown, so I don't have a lot of the day-to-day responsibilities of raising children. And they're so wonderful at this age because they ask me my opinion and they ask me for advice, which is fun.
What's the age?
Yeah, they're 20 and 23.
Ah, nice.
And then second, I feel like I've really spent intentional time, probably only in the past 5 or 6 years, to schedule the things that make me happy, the personal things that I enjoy doing versus sacrificing my time. I feel like there was a season in my 20s and 30s where I really did not plan for my own personal care. And I've really enjoyed that. I love to play pickleball. So I schedule pickleball games all week long. And
Nice.
certain things I've worked into my schedule that take priority. And I feel like I'm at a stage in my life where I've worked really hard for many years. And now it's time to enjoy some of the fruits of that labor.
Absolutely. I love hearing that. And I definitely need to work out between 5 and 7 hours to keep sane.
Yes.
Just to keep sane. I completely understand. But also how hard it is to carve time to stay healthy and doing the things you love doing. Otherwise, what's the point, really? Definitely, I'm with you on this. What's your favorite thing in real estate or in commercial real estate? What's the thing that really lights you up about what you do?
I really love helping people. And that usually comes in the form of problem solving or strategizing in some way. So that's the role that I play the most in our team. I get the luxury of helping a lot of our brokers really take a deep dive into their assignments and strategize and problem solve. So when something goes wrong or when a new opportunity presents itself, usually there's a knock on my door of, hey, how do we tackle this? And that's the part I love.
I love that. And do you have any influencers or role models or leaders that you look up to? Somebody that you're like kind of stalking them online because you love what they do?
I would say not online, but definitely in person. So we have some amazing industry professionals that have been great mentors to me over my career, where I can just pick up the phone or step into someone's office and ask maybe dumb questions or
Are they
I'm going to
ever
say
dumb
naive
questions?
questions. No, no, but naive questions. I don't know how this works. Can you explain it to me?
Mhm.
And can you explain it to me without an angle?
Mhm.
And I think that's really important in our industry and as women. I don't want your angle involved or your bias involved in the answer. I just want like what are all the choices and how do I tackle something that maybe I don't have as much experience with?
Mm.
And I have to say, also, my dad.
Mhm.
He not only was our lead investor, but he has been such a great advisor over the years. He came from a real estate adjacent industry
Mhm.
and he retired. So he also had a lot of time.
Mm.
And he's been so generous with his time
Mhm.
over the years.
No, I love that. I love the family business. I definitely
Yes,
would have loved having one of my parents mentoring me. Sounds
yes,
great. I love
yes.
family businesses. And if you were to meet your 20-year-old self today and give her an advice, a piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Think I would give my 20-year-old self the advice of take risks and
Mhm.
do it often. I am not naturally a risk taker and change. I'm a little bit slower to change. And I wish I would have taken those risky steps sooner.
Really?
Uh, and I feel like it's hard, especially in an industry where you don't necessarily know where the next path is going to lead.
Mhm.
But I think of starting my company with my brother. I delayed that for a long
Mhm.
time. We were buying properties along the way and we had our little investments, but it took me a long time to get comfortable with leaving kind of the safe corporate job
Mhm.
and coming over and doing a startup. And in hindsight, I wish I did it years earlier.
That's interesting. As I was hearing you saying I am not a risk taker, I'm like, what? I mean, you bought your property, your first property. I mean, everything that you tell me, you're definitely
Yes,
very brave. I wouldn't
thank you.
definitely not put you in the non-risk taker, but that's interesting to hear. And
Yes.
Audrey, what's coming up next for you?
I think that what's coming up next for me is really to spend some time giving back in our industry. I have really enjoyed being involved in Wired.
Hmm.
And I'm the chair this year for our ULI Urban Land Institute.
Hmm.
And so, really taking some time to intentionally give back to our industry.
Hmm.
ULI has this amazing program called READY. It's the Real Estate Diversity Initiative.
Hmm.
And so I teach several classes. It's a 14-week long program and it's really for women and persons of color.
Hmm.
And it's a development course to help them not only learn the development profession and industry, but to build relationships within the industry so that long term, there are more women and persons of color present in our industry.
I love that. I love hearing that. What a great project.
Yes.
And what are your golden nuggets of wisdom that you would like to leave our audience with?
That's a great question. I would say with your gut instinct.
Hmm.
I feel like so often during my career, I've said no to things just because of a feeling. And I'm always so grateful when things don't turn out the way that partners or projects had expected that I opted out.
Hmm.
So I've really leaned into saying no more often and to trusting my gut. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take risks. So I think it's a balance between the two. And if something sounds fishy or if it sounds like it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Audrey, thank you so much for being with us on the show today. It was such a
You're
pleasure.
welcome.
And
Yes, likewise.
I'm sure listeners got a lot of insights and a lot of wisdom from our conversation.
Great. Well, thank you. And it was very nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And that wraps up today's episode. I am Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I can't wait to join you again next week. Thanks for listening to Parlez-vous CEO today. If you enjoyed the show, leave a 5-star review. It helps us keep going. And connect with us on Instagram at Parlez-vous CEO. I am Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I know some days are harder than others. On those tough days, think back to why you started. What you're doing today matters, even when you can't see the results yet. Ideas are great, but it's what you do with them that counts. Find everything we talked about today at parlez-vous CEO.com. See you next week, and you've got this.